Good morning, Josh.
Morning. How are you?
I'm great, thank you so much. Everybody, you may or may not recognize Josh. This is Josh Hamilton. He's an author, political commentator, and founder of the Gist website. Now, Josh joined us once before for the Raw Report to talk to us about your book, right, Josh, which was Brexit, the Establishment Civil War. Just tell everybody just a wee little bit about that book.
It's actually turned out to be quite prescient now. I ended the book saying that there was going to be some monstrous crisis that the Conservative Party or the establishment more broadly were going to exploit for their own good. But I didn't see this level of crisis coming. It was released in February 2020, so just a month before,
Wow.
everything kicked off.
Look at
So,
that. That's amazing. That's amazing. Right. Well, let's get straight into it. So let's start off with the story that, well, has just sort of blown Parliament apart, really. And that is the implications of the Owen Paterson story. Just a bit of background. Obviously, Owen Paterson is part of the government, a Conservative MP. He was paid by two lobbying firms, which brings us really to the discussion in part about whether MPs should have additional jobs. But he was paid by two lobbying firms. One of them, and now that was Randox, they were paying him £500 an hour. And what was interesting, of course, is that you are allowed as a politician, you are allowed to have other jobs. What you're not allowed to do is lobby on behalf of them. And Randox ended up winning a 133 million contract for COVID testing without any other firms getting a chance to bid. And government make the Randox test mandatory for travel. And then obviously what we get is the profits. Randox report a 218 million revenue, which is 85% increase. It was so bad that even the Tory Daily Mail put it on the front page with the heading "Shameless MPs sink back into sleaze." And that was because, of course, on Wednesday they had the vote and Boris Johnson had essentially whipped them all that we're going to start changing the rules. And Owen Paterson, he severely breached the rules, to put it nicely, or been corrupt and taken 100k and more. Obviously there was a backlash, and the next thing we know is Owen Paterson is resigning. Over to you, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, this whole story kind of reminded me of the debate that goes on in America about the Citizens United case, where they said they essentially like legalized corruption. And in my mind, taking the second job already, the fact that that's legal is just abhorrent. Like the fact that they can get paid more in a year than they would earn from their standard MP salary is just, it's baffling to me on a number of levels as to how this was ever considered like acceptable. Yeah. But it really, for me, the wider like implications, there's a couple of things that I jotted down while I was thinking about this, was basically that we're seeing not only increasingly brazen acts of corruption, but that in certain areas there's been proof that like public outrage can cause them to change tact, because and it's, I think, a stark reminder of the fact that like they're all still there at the behest of us. Yeah. And that as people, and a democracy, we are still technically in charge. And when we see like very, very rapid U-turns, you kind of remember that, you know, because we can sit here feeling like quite powerless sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
And, you know, talking about the things that are out of our control, and the world seems like it's moving in directions maybe some of us don't want. But there's like a reminder there every time something like this comes up and they have to U-turn, that, you know, we actually are still powerful as people.
Yeah, absolutely. He said when he resigned, he said, "I will remain a public servant, but outside the cruel world of politics," which I thought was it just says so much about their privilege, really, because obviously what his peers sought to do was not expose him for any potential corruption. They sought to change the rules to accommodate him. This is hardly the cruel world of politics. This is when, and as you say, it's all become so blatant. They're not even bothering to hide the fact anymore that they consider themselves our masters.
And for me, that's what's going to be the weakness, because if they were really competent and corrupt, we'd all be screwed. But it's the arrogance and the incompetence that allows us to to expose them for what they are. Like I think it's the Byline Times was reporting that more than half of voters in the UK think the government is corrupt. And if you were someone coming up and thinking, well, you know, we need like say a new party or some fresh blood in one of the other parties. I mean, I think a new party's a better idea. But then you're coming up and you're going, how can we beat these people? They seem like their power is, beyond, maybe not reckoning, but like
yeah, well, it is to a certain degree, isn't it? But like you say, then there comes that moment when suddenly we realize that we do still have some power in this, and that we shouldn't feel hopeless or helpless, that we can, because it is that strength in numbers thing again, isn't it? And this is, I think, one of the reasons why they are obviously so keen to clamp down on the freedoms we enjoy on the internet, because that's how we all are able to pull together. And that's obviously problematic for them. I noticed that Angela Rayner, obviously Labour MP, Shadow First Secretary of State, she wrote a letter to the Commissioner. And if you remember, the Commissioner had obviously found that there was a problem with what Owen Paterson had done. And then they sought to sack the Commissioner. I mean, you can't make this up. And this is Boris Johnson. I mean, he's so blatant. Everybody knows he lies. Everybody knows that he's sort of amoral. And it's extraordinary. I've never known a time like this. Have you, Josh?
No, but then I was thinking about that actually last night. And because recently, for whatever reason, one of the old Al Murray comedy specials had come up on my YouTube, and I was just like doing something around the house and I put it on. And he had a whole bit about how, this is the worst government ever, like the worst government ever. And then he goes, well, actually, before that we had the coalition, but that was really the worst government ever. Yeah. And he went back through this thing where he was like, yeah, well, then he went back through Thatcher and the whole way back to Churchill, being like, well, that was just the worst government ever. And then I think it's just like, am I being like hyperbolic about this? Like, are they the worst government ever? But I actually think they are.
I think they are. Think about it. We've never been locked down in peacetime. We've never endured the madness and the utter incompetence and the misleading and the brainwashing that we are going through. And what's extraordinary is it literally is in plain sight. I mean, that is the thing. That's what it is. As you say, it's so blatant. But this letter, so Angela Rayner, she's written to the Commissioner, and she's not happy because obviously Boris Johnson is not going to declare the fact that he stayed at the holiday home in southern Spain of Zach Goldsmith, which is normally rented out at a fee of £25,000 per week. And obviously, Boris Johnson, he gets away with so much because he's still fortunate to be able to, people think he's, Mr. Jokey, Mr. Jolly, everything's fine. They don't realise how really scary he is under that exterior. I really hate it, Josh. I don't know about you, when people sort of familiarise themselves with him and you hear media commentators call him Boris.
My best friend often reprimands my entire group of friends for this. He's like, no, it's Mr. Johnson. He's not our friend. He's fucking us all.
That is exactly the truth. That is exactly the truth. Let me go to the comments. They're very busy already this morning. Let me just see what we've got. So, yes. Morning, folks. Have I missed much, please? No, you haven't, Obi-Wan Kenobi, but we have to understand they are not untouchable. Quite right, D. says. It's the same all over the world, says Luggerbugs. Lying incompetence in charge. Ray Can. Hancock owns shares in UK biggest genetic profiling company. Expect your genetic profile to be added to your digital ID soon. Angie, all governments are the same, just the colour of the flag changes. Yep, Josh, says Luggerbugs. I'm not quite sure what that referred to. They have no loyalty to anything but power and control. Ian Muir, Boris is a total liar, hypocrite and a philanderer, disintegral. These politicians are sociopathic, Defa, a very dangerous clown. And that is the reality, isn't it? That, that this whole thing of, oh, I'm all jokey, I'm really funny, I'll go down a tripwire with a flag and, and all this nonsense. But in truth, he's none of those things. I had a very long conversation with Jennifer R. Curie, he'd obviously had a 5-year
Mm.
relationship with. And the person that she talks about is completely different to the person that we know. But of course, she no longer likes him because she eventually found out what he was like. And I suppose that sort of haze of romantic, romance sort of maybe confused her. I don't know, love makes us all a bit daft, doesn't it, really? So anyway, Josh, let's move on to the next story. I'll pick this one up. Now, this one is gruesome, to say the least. So I'm going to warn you all. This is the one about David Fuller. And the reason that I wanted to cover the story of David Fuller being the man who is responsible for the deaths of Wendy Nell, Caroline Pierce 34 years ago, became known as the Bedsit murders because they were both murdered in their homes. And he presumably thought he'd got away with it. 34 years is an awful long time to carry out such crimes and not be found for it. But he was arrested last December after new advances in DNA techniques finally identified him. And it was when he was arrested that it was discovered that he had over 14 million images of utter depravity. 14 million. Think about, I can't even get my head around that, right? I certainly can't comprehend how sick and prolific he was. Now, these images included images of him sexually assaulting dozens of female corpses in the morgue of two hospitals that he worked at in Tunbridge Wells. He's an electrician, so he's a murderer and a necrophiliac. On Thursday, he pleaded guilty to the two murders. MPs have now called for a public inquiry into how a man was able to access hospital mortuaries and sexually abuse, they estimate, 100 bodies. Josh, what are your thoughts on this horror story?
Yeah, it's pretty disgusting, really. The 14 million images, that just I don't even know how you get that much hard drive space. I mean, I
Right.
saw that they pulled like a chest of drawers out, and he had it hidden in behind the chest of drawers in like a little pocket for like loads of hard drives, which is like, whoa. Okay, well, you clearly knew you were doing something very wrong if that's how much you're hiding it.
That's right.
Um, but the thing that really is even more stunning is the fact that, like, I think they said within a day of them announcing this, like 80 people had come forward to contact the police, which suggests that we don't quite know the extent of the crimes even at this point. Like, it's already like a horrific list of things. But it's the thing that always gets me with these cases is that, like, there's always like sort of very, shall we say, strange fetishes discussed when it comes to people like, say, Jimmy Savile, and I know you'd mentioned this to me.
Yeah.
And I did like a little bit of research on it. So yeah, in the 60s he was accused of the same thing in I think it was Leeds General Hospital.
Right.
And people are always like, oh, people don't do things like that, and then a story like this comes up and you're like, well, I mean, someone's doing it. That means, like, it's it reminds you that, like, but yeah, people can go to a very dark place.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason that I wanted to raise this up, and I said to you when I sent you the email, I said, I'm really sorry, it is gruesome. But the reason I want to is because, as you say, because it's so dark, because it's so depraved, people can't get their heads around it and imagine that this happens. But we need to be aware that this happens, because I saw an interview with the mother of one of the girls who had been violated by this man 3 times in the morgue. And that mother quite naturally was in bits. She'd lost her daughter, and then to find out that her daughter had been violated on top of that as well. And so they're talking about this inquiry. Obviously, they're going to make sure in future that there's CCTV in the morgues, and I'm not quite sure where they weren't there before. And they're going to be careful about who's able to have a swipe card to access it. And I think the other thing that's really scary about it is that there were press reports talking to exes of his who had no idea. They said he was perfectly normal. And when I've interviewed psychologists about this sort of level of depravity, they've told me that, yeah, what they do is they put their partner on a pedestal. Their partner isn't like those other women. Their partner isn't like the prostitutes. Their partner isn't like the women who they want to urinate over or anything. So they put their partner in a completely different place. So these partners said they had absolutely no clue. He was, fairly soft and gentle and all those things. And then we hear that and the thing is the other thing that I know is that whatever you see, there's usually like 5 times that in the background that you don't see. So we've heard he's killed 2 women. He's probably killed more. We've heard that he's violated 100 bodies. He's probably done more. I mean, 14 million images. Imagine having to be the cops wading through that, Josh, discovering that. I mean, it is horrendous. What lessons do you feel we can learn from this?
Ooh, that's a good question.
It's hard, isn't it?
Yeah.
You just don't know who's going to be like that, who's going to do things like that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it probably teaches us that you never know what's going on beneath the surface. There's definitely like an interesting look at how people can be 2 different types of people, or 2 like entirely different people depending on who they're around.
Yeah.
Which is a nice theme continued from our last conversations, which shows you that sociopaths that run our governments can be very different in public and in person, as Jennifer R. Curie was saying.
Yeah.
We need to, I don't even know what you do about this, aside from like trying to say, well, we need to try and make sure there's more help and mental health services for kids, especially because that's probably where everything goes wrong.
Well, and the other thing, and you're absolutely right, because we don't know his history, and but the other thing, of course, that we've realized, and certainly looking at this, is issues where at that level of depravity often go over into areas of child abuse as well. And he had child abuse images, and obviously, as you say, Jimmy Savile was rumoured to have been a necrophiliac as well. In fact, such a degree, Josh, I interviewed a woman who claimed to know about this in some detail and was able to supply us with such evidence that it ended up making the front page of the Sunday Express, that they said, yeah, we can go with this. We believe that there is sufficient evidence here that Jimmy Savile was a necrophiliac. Let me just go to the comments. No, Crone, you haven't missed anything. Well, I mean, but you can always look back on it later. Yes. And one of the things asked on here is, Scott Smith says, so don't trust nice people. No, that's not it. I mean, because obviously that's problematic. But what I think we are becoming more savvy to what other people are like. We understand that when people are like so OTT nice, there might be something else going on in the background. And we understand that when people set themselves up as like, social justice warriors, or I'm here for the charity and everything, there might be something else going on in the background. Unfortunately, we've reached that stage, and the same with a lot of people who have gravitated towards working with children as well. And that's not to say that everybody working with children is a paedophile, but it is saying that we now know that a percentage is. So we just have to be careful. And I'd hate to tar everybody with the same brush, but you're absolutely right, Josh. One of the reasons that we know so little about this is because it's a taboo subject. Who talks about necrophilia? It isn't a mainstream media subject, is it? Which is why I felt we needed to, because I believe it crosses over into areas we cover. Josh does loads of interviews. He also interviews victims of child abuse. And I would urge you to look at Josh's website, The Gist. Some great interviews on there. So Josh, David Fuller, I mean, it's just horrendous, really, isn't it? And obviously, the ripples of that and the repercussions. Do you think we should have an inquiry? Obviously, it can't be conducted by the hospitals, though.
No, I mean, I guess you have to have an inquiry, because you don't know, he might have had accomplices or
right.
So I think that the families and the victims are owed some sort of inquiry into it, just because I'm sure they want to know what happened, as disgusting as it probably is. They'll want to know what happened, and they'll want justice, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. Jimmy says transparency. Oh, there's so many comments happening so quickly. I'm literally missing them here. Like, oh gosh, transparency. So much has been hidden under the guise of discretion. Absolutely. Bella says, hi, Sonia and Josh. I see Ian in the chat. Now, Hugo is fine. Hugo will be back with us. Has he been given the Atwood, Bella? You're naughty. You're very naughty. Right, Josh, take me to a story that I know absolutely nothing about, and you're going to guide me through it. And this actually is the inspiration for your next book, The GameStop Saga. Tell us about it.
Right. Okay. So I'll give you the short version. So basically, in December, January of last year, a handful of people on Reddit basically noticed that a handful of hedge funds in America had made some bets that basically they thought GameStop, the company which is basically sells video games, secondhand ones as well, that company was going to go under because of the pandemic. They'd had like a whole bunch of different CEOs go through. The company looked like it was not going to do particularly well when no one is able to go into shops. And then Reddit basically spotted these crazy bets had got completely out of control because they were doing a thing called naked short selling, which to give you the absolute most basic thing is basically they were borrowing the share from someone who had it, selling it at a profit in the hope that the price would go down, they would buy it back and keep the difference. Wow. Now, if they do that enough, the company will go bankrupt, the shares will go to zero, and they never need to pay anything back, and they keep the entire sum that they'd made tax-free. Awesome.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
So they sold somewhere north of 220% of the shares short. So 2.2 shares were sold short for every single one that should exist, which is an absolute abuse of the way that the American stock market system is set up to encourage liquidity. They can sort of just print it and say that they have it in order to sell it, and they don't. So anyway, a whole bunch of people on Reddit spotted this and decided that they would start buying up the stock because that is the way to counter that sort of move in the financial world, if you can get enough people on board or enough people with enough shares. So the end of January 2020 came, the price spiked from about $4 the whole way to $480. Then all of the trading apps that people had been using to buy the stock had turned off the buy button and stopped people from purchasing it, and the stock price crashed. And everyone thought that was it, except this group of people on Reddit who thought that it wasn't possible that all of these crazy bets that the hedge funds had made had been covered. They said, no, you're lying, and have spent the last 9 months very slowly trying to work out what happened. And they have gotten to a point where a whole bunch of people who were literally in this as a joke and just enjoying watching memes about how they were going to, destroy Wall Street by buying a couple of shares, have now educated themselves on the absolute raw fraud and corruption of the financial markets in America. Right. And have started first they arranged everyone to in the shareholders meeting to try and prove that there was way more shares in circulation than should exist because of the naked short selling. And then that didn't work. So now they've started to directly register their shares with GameStop share issuer in the hope that if they get it to a high enough number, that it will be laid bare just how many shares had been sold short, and that the hedge funds will eventually be forced to cover their awful bets. And the people on Reddit, at least, that this is going to cause the entire financial system to completely melt down.
Really?
So that's what I'm writing about at the minute.
Yeah, because you describe it as the most important movement of the 21st century. Why do you say that? Because
so normally what happens when you get a whole bunch of people on the internet talking about corruption and some sort of thing that sounds like a conspiracy theory, it takes about, 3-6 months, and it has descended into infighting and anti-Semitism and all of the most the worst tropes of the internet. Basically, they'll normally turn in the incels and the MGTOWs will get a hold of the group, and it'll become all about how Jews are running the world, and it descends into madness basically, because that's what the internet gives us normally. Yeah. But these guys have not only remained outrageously focused on this one issue, they have educated themselves about the levels of fraud in the financial markets, and that this thing that started as a joke, people will not sell their shares now until there is like serious repercussions for the people who are involved here. Like the phrase that people have been saying is no sell, no sell. So like if they're not in a sell, they will not sell.
Wow.
Which and if they are right, which I believe that they are, but I mean, I'm not sure.
Right.
Then like there's going to be repercussions that we can't even possibly imagine, that this could literally shake the very bedrock of the financial system, like globally.
That would be astonishing, wouldn't it? Because it's been described as a sort of David and Goliath moment, a sort of Occupy Wall Street moment. And people are saying, you know, oh, it's just the same old story of the suits rigging the system, et cetera, et cetera. But, and the thing is that it does have huge implications attached to it. It sounds like it's a niche story, but it's not at all. And give us another comment on it, Josh, because you're much more au fait with all of this than I am. And I'm learning from you on this, and I love that.
Yeah, so the thing that I keep saying to people is that, so for example, I was speaking to this computer scientist, Tim Vinegar, who watches like Reddit and the internet and studies about how this sort of functions as a hive mind. And he was like, oh, so what are involved? Like 10,000 people? And I was like, man, there's over 1 million, I would say, easily over 1 million people. Like, and it's not just in America, it's the most like widely held stock in every major developed country in the world. It is unbelievable. And I tell people this and they're like, yeah, but you know, that can't be true. And I'm like, no, really, go and look. So the latest developments that have gone on was this direct share registering. And there's currently a court case going on against Robinhood, which is the main trading app that people would have used, and Citadel as well, which is one of the main hedge funds that are accused of, all this fraud and corruption. And the Citadel, in the acts of a very, very innocent set of people, decided to take to Twitter to defend themselves against a class action lawsuit that's currently being filed. Oh
my goodness me.
They went on Twitter and they started with, you know, some people believe that some people still don't believe that we put a man on the moon. These are all crazy conspiracy theorists and you need to not listen to them. And I could just, I know enough lawyers to know that whoever was working in that firm was going, why did you go on Twitter?
Yeah, exactly. Josh, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it. Been really interesting. Everybody, Josh is going to leave us now. Yes, he is. God, they're having some amazing conversations going on in that chat. Everybody, go check out Josh's website, The Gist. Josh Hamilton, author and commentator. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Hope to see you again soon, Josh.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Sonia.
Cheers. Thank you.